The diner smelled of fresh coffee, bacon, and buttered toast, the kind of comforting aroma that Harold Whitmore had come to rely on every morning. At 81, the veteran's routines had become sacred to him, grounding him in a world that felt faster and louder than he remembered. Rosie's Diner was his place of peace. He always sat in the corner booth by the window, where he could watch the morning sun creep across the parking lot while the waitress, Annie, brought him his coffee without asking. His bomber jacket, frayed at the cuffs, still bore the faded patches of his service. To anyone else it was just an old coat, but to Harold, it was a second skin, a reminder of the battles he had survived and the brothers he had lost. That morning was no different. He stirred his coffee slowly, a gentle clink of spoon against porcelain, and let the warmth seep into his hands. A couple of truckers at the counter exchanged jokes. A young mother helped her son cut into a stack of pancakes. Life was steady and familiar. Harold lifted his cup to his lips and allowed himself the small comfort of feeling invisible in a world that didn't owe him anything. The door swung open suddenly with a creak of old hinges, and silence rippled through the diner. The man who walked in didn't fit the morning calm. He was big, broad, his frame filling the doorway like a warning. His heavy boots thudded against the tile floor, his vest patched with crude designs and smeared with dirt. His eyes scanned the room, landing finally on Harold's booth. A sneer curled across his lips. He stalked toward Harold like a predator spotting weak prey. "Move it, old man," he barked, slamming his palm on the table. The coffee in Harold's cup rippled with the force. "That's my seat now." Harold looked up, his expression calm but firm. He had faced artillery fire in a foreign jungle at 19. This was just another bully. "I've been sitting here every morning for 20 years, Harold said, his voice steady. "You can have it when I'm finished." The diner froze. Annie, the waitress, clutched her notepad to her chest. The truckers shifted uncomfortably. No one wanted to intervene. The thug leaned closer, his breath heavy with stale beer, his jaw tightening at the defiance. "Did you just talk back to me?" he hissed, his eyes narrowing. Harold didn't flinch. "I've faced worse than you, son. And I walked away every time." It was the wrong answer for a man who thrived on intimidation. The thug's face twisted with rage. In one swift motion, his hand lashed out. The sound of the slap cracked through the diner, startling everyone. Harold's glasses flew from his face, clattering against the floor. His cheek burned as he slowly turned back toward the man, his dignity unshaken even though his hands trembled slightly from the impact. Gasps filled the room. The young mother pulled her child close. One of the truckers half rose from his seat, then hesitated when the thug's glare swept the room, daring anyone to challenge him. The air felt heavy with fear. Harold calmly reached down, groping for his glasses. He slid them back on with shaking fingers, his jaw set with quiet defiance. The thug smirked, enjoying the silence of a room too scared to interfere. He leaned down again, his face inches from Harold's. "Not so tough now, huh, old man?" Before Harold could answer, a new sound broke through the tension, a low rumble outside, growing louder by the second. The floor seemed to vibrate with it. Patrons glanced toward the windows as a line of motorcycles rolled into the parking lot, chrome gleaming under the sun. Engines growled like wild beasts, filling the silence with a sense of imminent reckoning. The thug straightened, confused by the noise. Harold simply lifted his chin, his eyes glinting behind his crooked glasses. He knew that sound anywhere, and he knew exactly what it meant. The diner door burst open with a force that rattled the sugar dispensers on the tables. Heads turned as the sound of boots thudded against the linoleum floor, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The air filled with the raw, unmistakable presence of men who lived by their own rules. They came in a line, leather jackets creaking, patches gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Their eyes swept the room with sharp awareness, each one carrying the weight of miles on the road and battles fought in shadows most ordinary people would never see. The red and white insignia stitched onto their backs was unmistakable, Hell's Angels. At the front of the pack was a towering man, shoulders wide, beard thick, and eyes like steel. He walked with the unhurried confidence of someone who never needed to prove himself. As soon as his gaze locked onto Harold, sitting bruised in the booth, a storm flickered across his face. He knew immediately, this wasn't just another diner stop. This was personal. "Dad," his voice rumbled low, heavy with restrained fury. The other riders paused, watching him, already aware that the situation was about to escalate. The thug, who only minutes ago had been smirking with bravado, shifted uneasily. He had swaggered in believing he was the predator, but now he found himself cornered in a room that had turned against him. The son moved forward, closing the space with slow, deliberate steps. The thug tried to stand his ground, but the weight of the man's presence pressed against him like a wall. The silence in the diner was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the jukebox. "You put your hands on my father?" the son asked, his voice carrying not just anger but something deeper, a deadly calm that made everyone's stomachs tighten. The thug swallowed hard, his earlier confidence evaporating under the intensity of the biker's glare. I didn't know he was. Didn't know what?" The son's words cut sharp. He took another step, close enough now that the thug had to crane his neck back. "Didn't know he's an old man who's done more for this country than you ever will. Didn't know he's my father. Or didn't know you just signed your own sentence the second you raised your hand to him." The thug's lips parted as if to form an excuse, but no words came. His eyes darted toward the exit, then to the circle of riders that had begun to close around him. The angels spread out without a word, forming a living wall that sealed the room. The patrons, wide-eyed, stayed still, caught between fear and awe. Annie, still clutching her notepad, whispered in a shaky voice to Harold, "Should I call the police?" Harold shook his head, his voice steady despite the redness on his cheek. "No, this isn't for the police. This is family business now." The thug's breathing quickened as the son leaned closer, so close that he could feel the heat of his breath. His eyes, cold and unwavering, locked onto the thug's. The message was clear: there would be no forgiveness, no shrugging this off. Around them, the angel's silence was louder than any threat could be. These weren't men who needed to raise their voices. Their very presence screamed consequence. The thug finally stammered, "Look, I didn't mean." The son raised a hand to silence him. "Save it. You touched him. That's all I need to know." The tension was unbearable. Every soul in the diner felt the weight of the moment, knowing something was about to break. The thug, once so eager to humiliate an old man, now found himself small, powerless, and entirely at the mercy of a son who had walked in with the fury of a storm and the backing of a brotherhood forged in loyalty and iron. And in that instant, the thug realized, he wasn't just up against one man. He was up against all of them. The thug's bravado collapsed the moment Harold's son closed the distance between them. His shoulders stiffened, but the sweat trickling down his temple betrayed him. The biker's eyes never wavered, steady as stone, carrying the kind of weight that broke lesser men without a single punch. The diner was dead silent, every patron caught between the tension of fear and anticipation. Even the hum of the jukebox seemed muted, as if the machine itself knew better than to intrude. "You've got two choices," Harold's son said, his voice low and steady, words sharp as a blade. "You walk out that door right now and never come back here. Or you stay," he leaned in close enough for the thug to feel the heat of his breath, "and deal with all of us." The rest of the angels closed their circle tighter, their boots heavy against the tile floor. Their faces were carved in stone, unreadable but dangerous. Not a man among them flinched, their silence serving as a more powerful threat than shouting ever could. The thug's eyes darted around the room, searching desperately for an ally, for a door left unguarded, for any path that might allow him to escape without losing face. But there was none. His lips parted, fumbling for words. I didn't mean." "Don't." Harold's son cut him off sharply, a single word that landed like a hammer. "You put your hands on my father. That's all that matters." The thug's tough exterior crumbled completely then. He raised his hands in surrender, his voice cracking as he muttered, all right. I'll go." He shuffled backward, his boots scraping clumsily across the floor. The crowd parted just enough for him to pass, eyes drilling into him with disgust. Every step he took toward the door was a step away from the power he thought he had, until finally he bolted through the exit, nearly stumbling as he fled into the parking lot. For a beat, silence hung over the diner, thick and heavy. Then the room erupted into applause. The truckers clapped their hands against the counter. The young mother wiped away a tear as her little boy whispered, "They saved him." Even Annie, who had been frozen with fear, finally exhaled a shaky breath, relief washing across her face. Harold's son turned away from the door and dropped to one knee beside his father's booth. Carefully, almost reverently, he lifted Harold's bent glasses from the table and placed them back on his face. His voice softened, stripped of the hard edge it carried moments before. "You okay, Dad?" Harold smiled faintly, a glimmer of pride in his tired eyes. "Takes more than a punk's slap to break me. But seeing you walk in like that, that was worth more than any medal I've ever worn." Emotion flickered in his son's eyes as he helped Harold to his feet. The angels clapped Harold gently on the shoulder as he passed, each one showing a quiet respect reserved for men who had carried their own scars of war, whether on battlefields or back alleys. As the father and son walked toward the door, the roar of engines outside grew louder, a symphony of steel and thunder waiting for them. The sight of Harold, upright and proud despite the bruise forming on his cheek, brought a swell of emotion to the diners who watched. He wasn't leaving defeated, he was leaving honored, carried by blood and brotherhood. Outside, the motorcycles gleamed in the morning sun, chrome shining like fire. Harold climbed onto the back of his son's bike, gripping the worn leather jacket with steady hands. The engines roared to life, the sound echoing across the lot like the battle cry of lions. The thug was gone, swallowed by his own cowardice. But what remained in Rosie's diner that day was a story of dignity reclaimed, of a son's fury, and of an old veteran who, even in his twilight years, stood tall with honor. It would be retold again and again, how the Hell's Angels rolled in, how fear turned to reverence, and how respect was restored with the thunder of motorcycles fading into the horizon.